The information provided on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Any investment decisions you make are solely your responsibility. You should consult with a professional to determine what may be best for your individual needs. In a world where it can seem like giant corporations are behind every aspect of our lives, from the phones in our pockets to the shampoo we wash our hair with to the shows we watch on TV, there are still a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs. After all, nearly half of all U.S. private sector employees right now work for small businesses. Of course, entrepreneurs also face a lot of potential pitfalls. Some of those are impossible to avoid. There's always the danger someone will show up with a better location or a better product or just a catchier name. But there are some pitfalls that are easy to avoid, or at least very possible to avoid, if you know what mistakes not to make. I'm Jay Gabler of Forum Communications, and this is Plain Money Talk, a podcast all about your financial life and the things that are affecting it today. Today, I'm joined by Hailey Margetta, Market Development Director at Bell Bank. She's going to highlight some of the most common financial mistakes that small businesses make so you know not to make them. Hailey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll get to know you a little bit better in a moment, but we like to open these episodes with 5 fast questions. So I'm going to ask 5 questions, and if you would, just answer them fairly concisely, and we'll dive into the nuts and bolts and details a little bit later in the episode.
Okay, I can do that.
All right, love it. Question number 1. Technically speaking, what is a small business?
Technically speaking, that answer is a little bit of a moving target. If we look to the SBA, the Small Business Administration, depending on your industry, it could be a business with 1,500 employees or less. It could also be a revenue threshold, for example, a business with 40 million of revenue or less. So it depends what space you operate in. My personal definition is a company which is privately held, where the owners are closely involved in running it, and that company has a local or a regional presence.
Makes sense. Is there a most common type of small business?
I wouldn't say there's a most common type. Small businesses span all industries from retail, technology, distribution, manufacturing. They are everywhere.
How often do people run small businesses, what you might say, is on the side, that is, in addition to a day job that's separate?
I don't have statistics, but what I will say in my experience is it's very common for someone who wants to start a company to de-risk that by keeping their corporate job. So they're working their 9 to 5, they're keeping their benefits, they're keeping their paycheck before they go all in on the next thing just to make sure it works.
I'm going to remember that word, de-risk. Start using that in everyday life. I'd like to de-risk this situation.
Yes.
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 Are there big differences among U.S. states, aside from geography, in terms of what it means to run a small business?
That answer is yes. When I think about geography, I think primarily about tax, regulatory, and talent, right? So let's say we were starting a business and we could pick to go anywhere. We should consider what's the corporate tax rate between state Y or state X, and what are the workplace mandates that may be in place somewhere that aren't in another place, like let's say paid leave. You've got to consider those regulatory frameworks. And the other thing you definitely have to consider, especially if you need a specialized workforce, is where's the talent? Because if you want to open in a state on the West Coast, but most of your talent is on the East Coast, well, that might not work so well.
I've worked on a talent attraction and retention task force in the Twin Cities area in the past. And so I appreciate the importance of having the right people in the right place at the right time and keeping them there. So what I hope is a fun question. What is your favorite small business name?
This is so hard. How am I supposed to pick just one after working in business and banking for 15 years? There's a company in the Twin Cities called Mazza. They make sauces and dips. And Mazza is a Farsi word for flavor. And I absolutely think that is the coolest name.
Yes. I thought about this and I thought, this is no longer a small business since it was acquired quite a while ago by Best Buy, but Geek Squad.
Oh, yeah.
You just know what they do. You put that on the side of a truck, where that truck is going and what kind of work it's doing.
It's good marketing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for humoring us with those five quick questions, Hailey. Let's get to know you a little bit. Where are you based, and how'd you get into this line of work?
I'm based in the Twin Cities. I've been here for 10 years, but I'm a Wisconsin native. And right after college, I got into banking because I liked the intersection of business and finance. So my day-to-day could be working with, let's say, a fan blade manufacturer who needs to buy a new plant because they're expanding. The next day, maybe I'm working with a company that makes granola bars and they need working capital because they want their product in Whole Foods. That subsequently, I'm working with a trucking company so they can expand their fleet. It's fun, it's fast-paced, the variety suits me. And I came from a small business family. My dad was in construction. And so demystifying debt, demystifying bank capital, and how small businesses can use that to grow it's more than a profession. It's like on a passionate level. So I love it.
Yeah, I imagine it must be really satisfying to see the actual people who you're helping and see these families who you're helping realize their dreams.
And these small businesses employ people in our communities locally. They contribute to our local economies, and they're so important. So I really value the work we do at Bell and that I do personally.
Right. Well, thanks for taking some time to share what you've learned in this line of work with our listeners. Our theme for this episode is how to lose a business in 10 days. That's attention-grabbing, but is it also literal? Are there actually missteps that can sink a business that quickly?
Okay, Jay, I don't have statistics or anything, but yeah, I think it's true. I think there are certain things business owners do that set themselves up for fast failure. I love the 10 days. Let's just say fast. And in my experience, it's usually what that looks like is the business owners just run out of options, okay? So liquidity, that's the first thing. You might have the best looking financials. You may be reporting profits on paper, but if you don't have cash for payroll, for materials, to keep the lights on, that's a very, very quick way that the doors will slam. So the second thing I would say is talent. If your key leaders or if your specialized workforce leaves, they take that knowledge, they take the culture, and it becomes very hard to rebuild that in a short amount of time. The other thing I see in my experience is operational risk. So it could be production. Can you get your service or product to market? And then on the other side is your supply chain, right? If you can't get the raw materials, if you can't find the right talent to produce your good or your service, well, then you don't have revenue. And if you don't have revenue, you definitely don't have cash. So it's kind of this cycle. But if you don't pay attention to those three things, there are certainly others. You could lose a business in 10 days.
So what I'm hearing is you can design a better mousetrap, but you're going to need the materials to make that mousetrap out of. You're going to need the people to build that mousetrap, and you're going to need the money to pay those people until you start selling the mousetraps.
Yep, yeah. Agreed.
So if someone is looking to launch a small business, what would you say are some key steps that should be on the startup checklist that people sometimes miss?
I would say when a company is very young, one of the mistakes right out of the gate is the owners, they commingle their business funds and their personal funds. So everything is in one fund. And that gets really tricky because how do you know you're making money? How do you know what your costs are? And later on, if you go on to want to raise funds from investors, maybe you want bank debt, now you have to untangle that. And it becomes very tricky to show a clear picture of what you're actually working with. So right from the get-go, even if the business is small, even if you don't have many transactions, get a business account and keep those transactions totally separate.
Any other things that you either see people fail to do or that you think that they do that they shouldn't have done when they're getting ready to launch those small businesses?
Yeah, let me talk about a couple other things. So another thing business owners do, and this could be a brand new founder or someone who's been running a small business for 20 years, is the scalability problem. Entrepreneurs are so good at vision. They know what they want. They sometimes lack a little bit of insight on infrastructure, meaning will the business grow and scale and thrive even if they're not the ones doing the work, right? Even if they're not the ones in the middle of the process. And if the answer to that is no, I have to be there, I have to be on site, I have to be driving, that can create a problem long term. So your small business checklist should say, am I building processes and procedures that are scalable long-term if I'm not there? Right? That also dovetails into tax and regulatory. If you start a business somewhere and you're pricing your product or your service, not factoring into, let's say, licensing, workplace mandates, again, we talked about the paid leave, other taxes and fees, you could actually be selling your product or service at a loss. And you don't figure that out till a year or 2 years later. Well, now what do? Do you raise your prices? Do you sell things and you're a little less profitable? So I think that business owner checklist has to include those facets right out of the gate.
There was a period when my dad was thinking about opening a coffee shop in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and it was interesting to go through that process with him. I was just, I was pretty young, so I was just watching him go through the process of scouting locations and consider whether he wanted to open one. He ultimately decided not to, but I think he was going through the process that you're describing, where he was really thinking about how is this going to play out, not just on day one, but over the months and years to come. Do I have, as a person, what it takes to be there every day to keep this business operational until I can hire more people? How is, rent going to play out? How are materials going to play out? And, not to say that going one way or the other was necessarily the right choice for him, but it was interesting to see him weigh all those variables.
I think that speaks to the opportunity cost of running a small business. It's fantastic in some respects. You get to control your own schedule. You are your boss. But the flip side is there's time and energy that has to go into that. And frankly, there is quite a bit of risk. There's also quite a bit of reward. So for each person, that checklist and that analysis they're doing is different.
Well, this is all great information, Hailey. Let's pause and hear from our sponsor, Bell Bank. We'll be right back here on Plain Money Talk.
Behind every moment, there's a feeling of happiness, of security.
Keep going, pedal, pedal.
Behind every dream,
Order up.
there's a spark.
We got the house.
With every challenge,
Just one more step.
there's a safety net. Behind every victory,
Yes!
there's a team. Behind every moment, there's Bell Bank. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
And we're back with Plain Money Talk. Usually at this point in the episode, we pause for a story that is somehow relevant to the topic at hand. So, Hailey, I wonder if you have a story to share regarding a small business that succeeded not just because the founders had a good idea, but because they made some smart financial and planning decisions.
Yeah, of course. I was working with a woman a couple years ago who wanted to be a florist. And she was in a corporate job in Minneapolis, and she thought, I'm just going to try this. I'm going to order product to my house and see what traction I get, right? She was selling to individuals like me and you. She was selling into weddings, corporate events. And I think much earlier in her life, her mom had been a florist, so she had this passion. And she decided, like we talked about, to keep her 9 to 5. She had 2 little kiddos. She needed benefits. She needed a steady paycheck. And she did that for 3 years. She had both jobs, and the business grew slowly. And she surrounded herself with a part-time team of experts so that she wasn't always the DIYer. Okay, so a part-time finance person, part-time on tax, part-time insurance, and I think she had a part-time attorney. And so the point I make about the DIY thing is a lot of entrepreneurs say, I've got the time, I don't have the money, I'm just going to do this. Well, you could spend 10 hours working on a spreadsheet and still do it wrong, or you could pay someone to get it done right in an hour. So she was really, really good at weighing where she was going to spend money and where she would do things on her own. I think she was around $1.5 million or $2 million in revenue after just over 3 years, which was crazy. And then by year 6, she decided she wanted to have more bargaining power with suppliers. She wanted more market reach, and she knew a couple folks in the industry. These were ma and pa flower shops in a variety of places in the metro, and she actually acquired them. So around the 3rd year, she was able to leave her corporate job, and she was working full-time in the business. By year 6, she had made 2 small acquisitions, which was so fun to watch. And today, I know she works in the floral business full-time, and she's living her best life. It's a great story of a small business. I think she employs something like 35 people locally across the Twin Cities.
Wow. Well, that really speaks to the importance of planning and getting good advice, as you were saying, because I'm sure that was a really difficult decision to make when she's thinking, I really want to follow this dream of getting into the floral business, but not ready to let go of the day job. But that is going to mean then you are basically working two jobs and you have kids, and that must be really tough. But clearly she had a plan. And she said, here's how I'm going to try to scale this up so that I can one day move over and be full-time in my new business.
Yeah, she was very, very mindful about how fast she was growing, and if she had the foundation to support that growth. And as a result of that, she did really well.
Great. Well, this actually leads into the next topic I was hoping we could discuss, which is one of those good problems to have as an entrepreneur, but one that's still a challenge, which is when you see that small business start to grow. And maybe you're in a position now to make some more hires. Maybe you're ready for a larger space. So what are some important things that you would advise small businesses to keep in mind at this stage?
This is a great problem to have. It means you're growing. It means you're doing something right. But it also means things can be a little chaotic. Your financials may not be in as much order as you want. Think about paperwork. Think about benefits, process, procedure. Make sure as you grow, those things are growing with you. Because when you want to buy the building or when you want to make the new hire or, all these things require time and they require you to be organized so you can supply concise, accurate materials. And that sometimes can throw people. I'm making all this money. I'm growing really fast. Why can't I just have this? Why isn't this more simple? Well, you're really disorganized, below the surface. So keeping track of process and procedure, keeping clean financials is really important to make sure you can do what you need to do quickly.
So I imagine there must be a temptation to think, I know what's in my bank account. I know I'm not breaking any laws. Let's just not worry about that stack of paper in the drawer. I want to, do this business that I love, get the product out there, satisfy the customers, help, whatever people I'm managing. But what I'm hearing is you shouldn't just let things get that sloppy behind the scenes because that could set you up to fail in the future.
And it doesn't happen intentionally. It's just one day you have one person working for you. The next day it's 10 people. You had one location. Now you have 3 locations. And like I said before, these entrepreneurs are so good at the vision. They can picture where they're going in 10 or 20 years, but sometimes they're okay flying the plane blind. They're okay, I'll figure it out while we're flying. And we want to slow that down a little bit and stay organized.
Absolutely. So here's another thing that can happen to small businesses as they grow. I'm curious how often you see successful small businesses combined or become acquired by larger companies. I mentioned Geek Squad earlier. That was a small business that was acquired by a larger company. Anything that business owners should keep in mind when they are thinking about what might happen down the line in terms of merging, potentially acquiring, being acquired by other companies?
Yeah, this is a great question. In my experience, I've seen more acquisitions than true mergers, where my company and your company merge. I typically see it as company A buys company B. Maybe the owners of company B work there for a while and then they're out, or vice versa. And I think the reason you may want to consider buying something, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, right now, a lot of baby boomers are retiring. It's creating amazing opportunities for people to buy businesses. And when you buy a business, you're buying growth. Instead of waiting for it, you're already buying customers, you're buying relationships with vendors, and that can be very powerful as you try to scale. You're buying talent. It's hard to find people. And if you find a team working for another company that works well together, that has a good culture, that is incredibly valuable to buy, I should say. And the last thing is succession. Maybe you don't have a family member who wants to run the company. Maybe there's no one internally who wants to run it. And so being able to stay on for a while after being acquired and wind down or wind into whatever your next step is a great benefit of an acquisition. Now, again, to keep in mind, acquisitions take time. There is a lot of foundation that has to get set before the checks are actually exchanged, before the wires actually go out. So going into what we talked about before is staying organized, keeping things clean, and having the right network of experts, the attorney, the tax person, the banker, will help you vet out good acquisitions and bad acquisitions quickly.
So people have options, potentially. If they have an idea, if they have a field of work they want to get into, they might have options regarding starting a new company from scratch, or there might be companies out there that they could acquire if they had those options. What are some of the variables that people are weighing when they are deciding whether to acquire an existing company or start their own?
That's a good question, and one that we could probably take an hour to talk about on the podcast. I will say, if you think about it in terms of risk tolerance, you want to start something or buy something, starting will be infinitely more risky. You're building everything from scratch. But that may work if you have a very novel idea or if you're breaking into like a new sector. Think about carbon capture or healthcare. There may not be a product or service that exists. So you're greenfielding it, which means you've got to start from nothing. On the other hand, if you're interested in construction or maybe a franchise, well, they're already there. There's already cash flow. There's already employees. There's already process. So that may be good if, let's say, you have a busy life at home and you're not looking to start something from scratch. Consider buying something. And a lot of times those also come with founders who want to stay involved and help you make that transition, which can be very valuable.
Although I imagine that can be a potential minefield might be a little strong, but I feel like when you have a company that has been founded by someone who has a relationship with that company, that could be you if you have your own business and you're being acquired. There are obviously pros to keeping on the person who founded the company and knows it so well, but also I could imagine that you could have potentially clash of strategy, personality, what have you. So I imagine there are some delicate conversations and considerations there.
It's not all sunshine and roses. It can get tricky. I think we actually hear a lot about that in the news, right? Especially with publicly traded companies. When they're smaller businesses and you have a situation where someone's looking to leave because they are wanting to retire, those people are so driven by legacy. They want you as a new owner to succeed so that you take care of their employees. So, you take care of their name, you take care of their customers. So it actually there can be a lot of alignment, I've actually found, surprisingly.
So starting a business from scratch, you're going to need some capital there to begin building that business, acquiring everything you need, hiring people, what have you. But of course, if you're buying a business, there's going to be a price tag. What are some options people have for coming up with that money that they would need to invest to purchase a business?
The price tag can feel scary. You can have people saying, how am I going to get this money? And I think you have a variety of options depending on your situation. You can bring personal cash, personal equity. You can always look for investors. Or very commonly, you can look for bank financing. There's conventional bank financing and then there's SBA financing. And we do both at Bell Bank. I would say bank financing is one of the most common ways that small business owners are buying other companies, or a first-time business owner is buying a new company.
So there are options.
There are plenty of options. Those can also feel confusing, but that's why it's good to talk to an expert who can lay out the different loan types, rates, and financing structures and make that a lot more seamless and easy for you to get.
And what about when you are running a business and thinking that someday someone might acquire your business? I mean, maybe some of our listeners are in this boomer demographic and thinking, gosh, I've had this small business, I've grown it for, 30 years, what have you, but it's getting time for me to, take a little more time with the grandkids, step away, let go of this business. Anything people should be thinking about as they think about the possibility of selling their small business?
Mm-hmm. I think selling businesses can be really exciting, but really intimidating. It's exciting to think that what you've built is now giving you a financial reward or return, but it's also the legacy for so many of these people. And they want to make sure that whoever buys that legacy keeps it intact. So I think what owners need to make sure they know who they're selling to if legacy is really important. Right? So instead of selling maybe to a strategic buyer or to private equity that may have a different end game in mind, maybe you think about selling to employees. Maybe you think about selling to someone else locally that will keep your labor force intact. And just weighing those opportunity costs of when is the right time for me to exit? What are my opportunity costs in terms of, do I want to be with my grandkids? How is my health? Do I want to travel? And making those decisions. It is very important. Here's one trap I see all the time, where a company maybe wants to buy another company or a company wants to sell to another, is the owner has used the income statement kind of like their own financial checkbook, right? They have a lot of personal bills that are flowing through that P&L. The result is the income of the business is lower, which has been fine while that person's run the business. Now they want to sell it for top dollar. And they're saying, well, my car payment won't come through here. And well, I wouldn't have spent money on this. And well, I wouldn't have done this marketing campaign. The numbers are what they are. So at the end of the day, if you are thinking about selling, give yourself 3 years of consistent net income, because that's usually what the sale price is based on. It's a helpful tip.
Great tips. Thank you, Hailey. Well, and we've been talking about how to make a small business successful, how to navigate transitions with small businesses. But I imagine a lot of small businesses do eventually wind down, sometimes by design. There's a plan to say, okay, I'm going to dissolve this business or, sell this business or what have you. And, sometimes not. Sometimes it's not your choice. And it just you have to say goodbye to the business for financial reasons or other considerations. When it's time to dissolve a small business, are there things that people should keep in mind to sort of set themselves up for the best, to put themselves in the best situation moving forward?
I love the way that you asked this question and you said the word wind down. A lot of people would say, my business failed. And there are statistics out there that say, in the first 10 years of a small business, 65% of those will fail. And I try to reframe that in small businesses are a season in many people's lives. It could be a 5-year season, a 10-year season, a 30-year season. But eventually they may decide the math doesn't work. Again, there's opportunity costs. They want to do other things. And winding down the business is not the same thing as the business failing, but there's this stigma around it. And I've seen plenty of businesses wind down and the owners are just as happy, if not happier. So I love the way that this question was asked. If you are thinking about winding down your company, make sure you inform important stakeholders. For example, if you're borrowing, if you have loans with a bank, talk to them. Make sure those are repaid. Same thing as if you have investors, being really forthcoming and transparent with your thought process and maybe what challenges you're dealing with so that one day you don't pick up the phone and say, hey, Jay, decided to close the doors. Let me know what you need from me. That is not the way you want to do it. So consult the folks, consult your tribe that have been helping you along the way because they'll offer good tips and advice as well.
Sounds like the advice you might give someone in a personal relationship as well, that people change, people grow, circumstances can get tough or easy, and you're not helping yourself or your partner, your family, if you are completely closed off and not open with your loved ones about what's going on in your life. And it seems like there's a parallel there in business, that if you have business partners, of course you want to insulate people from knowing or dealing with things that they don't need to be dealing with or that might stress them out. But also keeping key partners in the dark is not going to be helpful for you either.
Yeah, it creates a lot of problems, that communication gap. So as long as that's there, usually business owners have no issue winding their companies down.
Well, speaking of winding down, we are reaching the end of our time. I want to respect your time, Hailey, but we did promise people that we'd tell them how to lose a business in 10 days or how not to. If you had to summarize what we've been talking about and sort of leave people with a sort of key thought in terms of what to avoid, if you don't want to lose your business in 10 days, how would you summarize that?
I would summarize it. That's a tough one, but I would say surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in the areas that you're unsure about. Ask for help. Just ask. There are so many people in local communities that want to make sure small businesses thrive. I would also say be really mindful if you're thinking about starting a small business that you don't rush in without your de-risking plan, and that you're mindful of not, I see a lot of business owners come in and say, I'm just going to undercut my competitors. They're selling all on price. But what's your value proposition? Because the companies who get that right, they're in business for a long time. So be methodical, be thoughtful, give yourself time, and there's really no limit to how big your small business can grow.
That's wonderful. That's a great note to end on, Hailey. And there's just one last question that we ask all our guests on this podcast. It's always the same. And the question is, what's one piece of financial advice you wish you'd been given a long time ago?
There's so many quotes. There's so many pieces of advice I wish I had gotten earlier. I think there's a quote that stands out to me, and I don't know if it says much finance as it is business related, and I wrote it down just so I don't get it wrong. It's actually from Benjamin Franklin, surprisingly, and it says, "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." So basically what that's saying is price is what you pay, but value is what you keep. And I heard that a couple years ago and just thought it's such a good metaphor for so many things, not just in business, not just when I work with customers or when customers are working with their vendors, right? The flashy deal, the cheap piece of equipment. It's just something we can all take with us in life. The cheapest option is generally not the best and can oftentimes turn into the most expensive. So I thought it was well worded. It's one of my favorites. So I'll leave you with that one.
Well, and as we're hitting our 250th birthday here in the United States of America, why not go back to the originals, go back to Ben Franklin? I love that. Well, thank you, Hailey, for taking time, sharing your wisdom with us here on Plain Money Talk.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everybody who's listened to this latest episode of Plain Money Talk. See you next time. If today's conversation hit close to home, you're not alone. Bell Bank works closely with business owners every day to help them avoid those same types of mistakes. From cash flow planning and lending to treasury management and fraud prevention, Bell's team of business bankers can help provide practical guidance to help your business grow sustainably and build a smarter financial foundation. Learn more about Bell Bank's business services at bell.bank/business. Bell Bank, member FDIC.